On today's episode of Lift Your Future, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and how you can apply it to both your professional and personal life. Welcome to Lift Your Future, a podcast that teaches you coping skills through stories, methods, and proven techniques to improve relationships and outcomes in your personal and professional life. I'm Nicole Winkler, a licensed therapist and executive coach. On this podcast, we'll share relatable life experiences designed to help you grow. I will provide easy, practical ways to develop thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to impact your life, both personally and professionally. My goal is simple: to help you lift your future. Hello, and welcome to Lift Your Future podcast. Today, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. And this became a topic that was really important to me. One, because I am a therapist and we like to talk mushy feelings and all that stuff. But actually, when I started going to therapy when I was younger, like a teenager, and then into my 20s, I realized how much I didn't know about feelings, my own feelings. And then it got me thinking, when did I ever learn about this? Like, they don't teach you about it in school. Maybe mad, sad, glad, happy, are the main feelings, but we have so many more feelings than that. So I started learning more about my own emotions, and then I started teaching people about them. And then this concept of emotional intelligence had really started gaining traction. It's a relatively newer concept. IQ has been around for a long time, and that's the measurement of your ability to reason and problem solve. But EQ, or actually EI, is what it's also called. So emotional intelligence really was coined in 1990 by Mayer and Solovey, these two guys, and they said, I think that there's some measurements for emotional intelligence. And then Daniel Goleman, who at the time was writing for the New York Times, saw the article, loved it, started doing his own research, and Daniel Goleman is actually that's who most people think started emotional intelligence. And in 1993, he wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, and it's all about that in the workplace. So he started really looking into that of leadership and how that affected teams and organizations. And it really took off from there, became very, very popular. It's a very popular term nowadays. But I also, when I had met my husband, he had a very high IQ and a very low EQ. And even after we got married years and years later, and after we had children, I remember asking him at one point, "Do you still love me? Do you still love me?" And he's like, "I love you until further notice, Nicole." And I was like, wow, really? He's like, "I don't know why I have to tell you. Like, I obviously made this decision. I married you. We're together. We have a family. Why do you need to hear I love you?" I'm like, "Oh, because I need to." And that was kind of a demonstration of his emotional intelligence being very low. He didn't really understand how other people's emotions worked. And I would tell him, sometimes he would say something to somebody. I'm like, "You cannot say that, because it might hurt their feelings." He's like, "Well, it's the truth." I'm like, "Okay, but you have to also take into account other people's feelings." And I didn't realize at the time that he lacked so much emotional intelligence. In the meantime, he's learned a whole bunch. He's read a lot of books. We had 2 daughters, which helped tremendously. And so he's really in tune to their feelings, and it helped him a lot. But I also see it show up in the workplace, and it's considered a soft skill, which is becoming one of the most important soft skills to have, being aware of how people interact in the workplace, how aware we are of our own emotions, and how aware we are of other people's emotions. And so I ended up getting trained in the Genos Emotional Intelligence Inventory, which is a leadership emotional intelligence inventory. And so through that, it really just kind of brings to light how we can help employees grow in this way, which in turn helps productivity, it helps the organization grow, and overall happiness for workplace satisfaction. So I wanted to share some of the strategies with you today, and then a story about a guy that we'll call Tom today, about how I worked with him and the things that we implemented to help him really thrive in his role on the leadership team and his employees, and grow that team of employees that he had too. So the very first concept that Solovey and Mayer came up with was perception and expression of emotions. How do we perceive our own emotions, and how do we perceive the emotions of other people? So I get a lot of people that come see me and they are angry. And, there's a little bit of debate about anger, but that's a secondary emotion in my opinion. and from all the research I've read too. So we use anger to cover up a lot of other emotions. It's a very powerful emotion. It gives us energy. We get motivated by it. And so I always like to uncover that. Okay, so you're angry. Tell me more about that. What makes you angry? Or in Tom's case, he came in and he was pissed off every time he had to go to a meeting with his leadership team. He left feeling pissed off. That was it. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, pissed off. That's it. I'm like, okay, that's not true. Just like when somebody comes in and tells me it made me feel like shit. I'm like, shit is not a feeling. So we need to kind of uncover that a little bit more. And through my work with Tom, he started identifying how he really was feeling. And so he said, I feel invisible. I feel not heard. I feel not respected. Like, okay, those are actually feelings. I feel embarrassed if I come up with an idea and somebody looks at me like it's stupid. And I said, well, did they say that it was stupid? He's like, no, they didn't, but I could see it was all over their face. And so that is kind of the perception piece of, did I perceive that correctly? And then am I also perceiving my own emotions correctly? And so when he started to uncover his own emotions about the situation, and he would avoid, what he would do is he would leave the meeting and he would go shut his office door and not talk to anybody the rest of the day. He would rarely answer his phone or his emails. And he actually thought he was doing the right thing because he didn't want to project his anger onto other people. And so he said, I'm doing that because I'm trying to protect my people. Well, what was happening was his people weren't getting things done and decisions weren't able to get made because he wouldn't get back to them because he was so upset. And this took weeks of kind of uncovering piece by piece, peeling back the onion as far as how that worked for him. The second component is let's see, let me review my notes so I don't say it wrong. Use of emotion to facilitate thinking. So a lot of times, especially in the workplace, we think, leave emotions at the door. Business is not emotional. Take the emotions out of it. But the reality is we have an emotional response to a situation way before we have the thinking in our prefrontal cortex, like right in the front of our head. That's our decision-making piece. That's our thinking. But we have an emotion before that happens. We have an emotional response. So we have an emotion. It's really hard to take emotions out of decisions or out of a thought process when that's the first thing that triggers. And so being aware of that and knowing that our emotions are there, and like you guys have heard me say this before, feelings are feelings. They're not facts, but they're feelings, and they're alerting you to something. So it's like a red flag. Hey, look at this. And so that's what it means, facilitating our thinking. What is that emotion telling us? And how are we making decisions? And what is our behavior based on that emotion? And then the third one is understanding our emotions. It is really hard to make good decisions. It's really hard to have good relationships with people when we don't even understand what's going on within ourselves. And so that was part of the exploration with Tom. What are you really feeling? What's really going on with you? What's activating here? And let's pick that apart a little bit. So that way you are able to understand yourself more, and then you can then understand other people's emotions. That's the really cool thing about emotional intelligence. Your IQ is pretty set in stone. It doesn't go up, maybe up and down at max 10 points throughout your life. But your emotional intelligence and those skills, it's a social intelligence. So we can grow it. We can learn differently. We can learn more about ourselves. And when we start to learn more about ourselves and our own emotions, we are able to see it more in other people. And it's really cool when I work with clients, they come back and say, oh my gosh, now I know why that person is responding that way. I totally saw the look on their face, or I saw them shut down and in the meeting, instead of, just thinking that they were distracted by something or they didn't want to participate. They start recognizing other people's emotional responses while they're learning about their own. And then the fourth one is managing our own emotions. And then they also say managing your emotions for other people. So when we say that, it's okay, I didn't make somebody feel that certain way, but understanding and recognizing that our behavior and what we say and do does impact other people. And being able to recognize what that is, think about that before we say something or before we do something, and then, using that to help build that relationship and then achieve more together. So in the case of Tom, he came and he was pretty off-put about working on this leadership team, didn't know if he still wanted to work for the organization anymore, kind of wanted some direction for his life. So I did an emotional intelligence assessment for him, and it was pretty low for self-awareness and pretty low for management of his own emotions, and authenticity as well was pretty low, because he didn't feel he was able to be his most authentic self without lashing out or shutting down or blocking people out. So we first started with, okay, self-assessment. What's going on with you? Let's pick that apart. Now we're going to talk about how that impacts and affects other people. Let's think about it from their shoes. How do you think they felt when you did that? Or when you wrote that short response back in an email and you didn't say good morning or good afternoon. It's sometimes that simple. Or even smiling at somebody when they are talking to you or they give you feedback and you want to say something to them. A smile is actually very powerful. So he thought it was pretty stupid, but he promised me that he would go back to work and he would try for a week to be cognizant of it, write it down, and then come back the next week. And he was like, okay, you might be onto something. I'm not totally believing this stuff, but you might be onto something here. I said, okay, all right, okay. Well, let's keep going here. So how you're managing your emotions. Let's understand and manage them. Where do you think this came from? And so we go back to belief systems. What was your belief about that? How do you filter these thoughts and these emotions for yourself and your brain? And so we started with some common beliefs that people have that they hold, like I'm not worthy. And that was one that came up for him a lot, was he didn't feel worthy when he would share something in the leadership team meeting. And then in turn, he was actually making his employees feel that way. And so we picked that apart and he did some exercises about that a couple weeks later. Then we started doing some feedback from other people. I had a list of questions, just a few questions that he went to with other people on the leadership team and asked them for feedback. And the assignment was to listen, not respond, to listen, notice what was going on in his body, write down their answers, write down his feelings next to that in parentheses so we could process and talk about it in the next session. So we first did that for the leadership team. He got some feedback that he didn't necessarily like, but it was actually very constructive after we started talking about it and processing it. He didn't realize his nonverbal behaviors and sometimes verbally his tone and how he would say things and be very short with people, how that was coming across to other people. And then he was able to then construct a plan to talk to the leadership team about how he was feeling and what was going on within him when he would come with his ideas and he felt that they were being shut down or he wasn't being heard. And so within that process, they were able to work on repairs within their relationships with each other. And he was able to grow on that leadership team and he felt more respected and he felt more heard. And so that belief system of I'm not worthy was not being triggered the way that it had been before, which was triggering shame for him, a lot of shame. And then he then had the assignment to go do that with his employees and people that worked for him and get the same different kinds of feedback. There were a few different questions and get that feedback from them and come back, write down how he felt about it when he heard them saying those things and come back. And that raised his awareness of how his team was reacting to him. And that opened his eyes to the fact that they have emotions too. And his behaviors and his communication with them was really important. And he realized through that process that they weren't as productive as they could have been. They didn't get done with things. And he would get oftentimes frustrated when they didn't meet deadlines. He's like, I'm actually probably more of a barrier to them meeting the deadlines than they are. And so it's like, whoa, it's kind of like this light bulb moment, aha moment, which was really cool. And so Tom was able to take that information back with him, use that with his team, use that with the leadership team, and, overall impacting the organization and having a much stronger team bond, a much stronger relationship on the leadership team. And they were able to do some really cool things that he never thought that he would do. And he said, I don't need to leave this company. This is an awesome company to work for. I'm so grateful that I learned about this. So emotional intelligence is really important. And, I gave you an example from my own personal life as well in our relationships that we have with family members, friends, people we, bump into at the grocery store, any of those things. But then also in the workplace, it's really important to, one, be aware of our own emotions and the emotions of others, be able to manage our emotions, But in order to manage our emotions, we have to understand them. And so I'm a huge proponent that we all need to learn about feelings. And maybe that'll be another episode that I do, is talking about feelings and the different feelings and what they are and how they impact us and how they show up in each one of us. It's different for a lot of us. So that is something that I work on with clients on a very regular basis. It's a topic that's very near and dear to me. I've done a lot of research on it. I will say it's near and dear to me because I originally started when I was a therapist. And I think that that's still really important in coaching. It's really important in life and in business.